our opponents, the media, and the whole world will soon see, as we begin to take further actions, that the powers of the president to protect our country are very substantial and will not be questioned.
Stephen Miller, the aide behind Donald Trump's cruelest immigration policies, has struck again. Sources tell NBC News that last year, the White House killed a settlement that would have provided mental health care for immigrant families who had been separated at the border, separated because of U.S. policies. The White House insists Miller was not involved. But an administrative official tells NBC News, quote, ultimately, it was Stephen who prevailed. He squashed it. Joining me now, one of the reporters on that story, MSNBC's Jacob Soboroff, author of Separated, also Caitlin Dickerson, national immigration reporter for the New York Times, and MSNBC contributor Paula Ramos. I want to start with you, author of Finding Latinx. Jacob, I want to start with you. Stephen Miller has been known as one of the most ideologically driven and just out-and-out racist members of this administration when it comes to immigration. What exactly has been his impact on immigration policies at the border with the coronavirus? What has he used COVID to do that may have been more difficult for him to do beforehand?
Well, and look, Caitlin can speak to this, Dr. Johnson, just as well as I can. She's done some extraordinary reporting on this. You know, he's expelled literally thousands of migrant children from this country under the cover of COVID with little to no access to due process, legal counsel. And just recently, a federal court obviously said that the federal government, the Trump administration, must stop doing that. But really, that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, even before COVID, right now with COVID, they're carrying out some of the things that they wanted to carry out during the family separation policy. And I think his most profound legacy and impact will be, and I'm sure you've heard me say this before, the torture, according to Physicians for Human Rights, of 5,500 children due to this policy, the government-sanctioned child abuse, according to the American Academy of Pediatrics. And as you mentioned, we just learned this week in this new report that we put out that he also rejected, according to sources that we spoke to, a fully negotiated settlement agreement to provide mental health care for those children that they tortured after it had been approved by the Department of Justice at the highest levels.
Caitlin, you did a story on the fact that not only has the U.S. sort of abused and taken advantage of children, minors, at the border, but they've also deported them to countries that they did not come from. How on earth does this happen? And how many different kinds of people need to be held accountable in a new Biden administration for this kind of human rights abuse?
Well, I think there's a through line that we can draw between all these different policies: family separation, the expulsion policy, which is included, as you pointed out, expulsions of children back to really kind of random countries. You know, we're sending Central American kids to Mexico. It's not clear why they're not from Mexico, and doing so violates international agreements between the two countries. And I think the through line is this haphazard treatment of children, you know, and policies that have led to kids being separated from their parents for months and sometimes years on end. And so I think, you know, it's treating kids like they're not kids, like they're not people. So there are really big questions to ask once President-elect Biden takes office, because, you know, I think one of the reasons why, you know, Jacob's story this week is so important is because a separation doesn't just impact a family as it's playing out, but it has impacts for months, for years, you know, for some kids for their whole entire life. And I've seen that. I know we've all seen that in the reporting that we've done with families who are still struggling today. And so it's kind of hard to really quantify or wrap our arms around the level of damage that has occurred, because it's just so staggering. It's going to take time.
Paula Ramos, the assumption by less sophisticated political analysts was that Donald Trump and Stephen Miller and Jeff Sessions and the Republican Party in general, their treatment of children at the border was going to galvanize the entire Latino community to vote against Donald Trump and vote for Joe Biden. And that's not how things played out. Sometimes because people didn't understand, perhaps because also, you know, Cubans in Florida are different from the Tejano community at the border. Can you talk a little bit about how the border treatment is viewed differently in different sections of the Latino community in America?
Of course. I mean, let's talk about the Cuban example, right? Which everyone is very fixated on. If you are a Cuban in this country, your experience as an immigrant is very different, perhaps, from a Mexican person or someone from Central America. Some of the things that I always think about when I'm in Florida is Cubans sort of get to pass in the state as white folks. You know, they can detach themselves from that experience. They get to forget that they too were once refugees, right? That they too were once immigrants. And so there is this sort of force that perpetuates racism amongst Latinos. And in Trump, some Cubans, right? Some people in Texas, some Latinos get to forget that they are immigrants. And that is a very true reality that we have to deal with as a Latino community, to understand all of these different nuances and just to be face to face with the fact that we too are racist. We too perpetuate racism. And some people see power in whiteness.
Yeah, and I think the discussion of sort of the difference between self-identified white Latinos and other groups of people see these issues, I think that's something we really need to understand sort of as America grows and browns in the future. Jacob, I want to bring up something that I actually wrote about a couple years ago, and you talked about torture and the difficulties on the border. Under Jeff Sessions, border security and ICE were given the power to eventually eliminate their own internal complaints about sexual violence and abuse. They were allowed to sort of take those complaints, and after 6 or 7 weeks, they were able to get rid of them. Is there any chance that as we begin in this new administration review, what has happened to these children? Is there any way we can find out hard data? Is there any way we're going to be able to find out how many of these kids may have been sexually abused by border guards, by different individuals they were placed with, and bring those people to account?
Well, and, again, the amount of abuse, the sheer volume of abuse that you've written about, that Caitlin's written about, is truly staggering. In the height of the summer of 2019, when the Clint Border Patrol station was overflowing, we did a report after Caitlin's about the Yuma Border Patrol station, where allegedly a young migrant girl had suffered sexual abuse by a Border Patrol agent there. Really, it's up to the incoming administration and also, we have to say the outgoing administration, what they do with those records and what they do with that evidence. And so right now, I think a lot of people are waiting very intently to hear what the incoming Biden administration plans to do about all of this, about abuse in border stations, about abuse of children under the family separation policy. What will the Department of Justice do? What will the incoming Congress do? And I think that that is just the tip of the iceberg, because there are questions about family detention centers. Are they going to expand the use of family detention centers? What are they going to do about the expulsion policy that we've been talking about? Where are they going to reunite the migrant families that were tortured and abused, in the words of experts? Will it be on U.S. soil, or will it be in their home country? Nobody, when you talk to advocates and lawyers and the families themselves, want to have those reunifications take place by way of deportation of the children. I think all of this is part of the conversation that the transition team is having right now. And frankly, there are a lot more questions than answers when it comes to what ultimately might happen.
Caitlin, there's a tremendous irony here that Stephen Miller tried to use COVID as an excuse to keep people out of the country and kick people out of the country when the United States is leading the world. We're number one, and not in a good way, when it comes to not being able to handle COVID and being able to handle infections. Have there been any questions? Have there been any complaints about people who have been detained at our border who contract COVID because of the failure to keep them safe and protected? And what kinds of avenues would those people have if they say, hey, look, I came over here as a legitimate refugee, now I've contracted COVID? Can they complain? Can they go to the UN? What are their avenues?
That's a really good question. Tons of people, thousands have contracted COVID in American detention centers. And the U.S. has even deported quite a few people knowing that they have COVID back to their home countries. And that's something that, the New York Times launched an investigation on. So it really just shows, again, that irony that you pointed out, that this policy of expelling both adults and children, part of which has been overturned, but part of which is still in place, it was justified and predicated on the existence of the coronavirus. But we've known, for years, we've known that Stephen Miller came into office. He scrubbed through the entire federal code. He did a very thorough job. No one can take that away from him, and basically identified ways that, the executive power, that the president could try to shut down the border without using or without having Congress involved in any way. He's done a very thorough job of that. And I think, too, when we look ahead, we're talking about the future, what's going to happen. I think that those of us who covered immigration for years before President Trump took office, what we see is that the administration said, told us what it was going to do. It was going to enforce all these laws and use these systems of enforcement to their fullest possible extent. They've done that. But I think, the fallout that we've seen underscores that the systems are really the problem. As Jacob brought up, we've got family detention centers that have been for years called out for being just inhospitable to the basic needs of kids. And so it's the systems that need to be looked at moving forward.
Paula, real quick. So this administration, this outgoing administration, Donald Trump, has always had a fraught relationship with Mexico. First with Pena Nieto, where he claimed, hey, I'm going to build a wall, I'm going to make you pay for it. That didn't work. Now with Lopez Obrador. Now that we're dealing not just with issues of refugees and migration, but also COVID, what do you think the incoming Biden administration would need to do to improve relationships with Lopez Obrador and Mexico when it comes to the human rights abuses and the proper handling of these families that are coming over the border?
I mean, I just think the fact that we're actually going to have a leader, someone that knows how to navigate diplomacy, I think that's going to make the biggest difference. Someone that actually sees a threat, that sees COVID-19 as a real threat, that knows where the threat is coming from. Look, Mexico, at the end of the day, did end up becoming one of Trump's supporters, right? They did end up becoming the folks that created a wall for Latinos and for immigrants. And so I think one of the toughest crises that Joe Biden will be up against is tearing down that border, right? Reconciling that relationship that Donald Trump actually, that was the biggest surprise. Mexico did end up becoming one of Donald Trump's best friends. And so let's see how Joe Biden deals with that. But I think there's reasons to be hopeful.
Yeah, that was surprising because Lopez Obrador was like, these guys are about as far apart as you can imagine politically. Jacob Soboroff, Caitlin Dickerson, Paula Ramos, thank you all so very much. Ahead, as the coronavirus throws a wrench in our nation's economy, we'll look at what this could mean for the entertainment industry. We come back.